North Korea and football are two subjects that aren't really associated with each other. If I asked you to name one North Korean footballer, most of you probably wouldn't be able to do it. But in actual fact, North Korea does have some football history and it's actually quite interesting. But first we need to forget about football, we need to set the scene. North Korea, officially known as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, is a country in East Asia. It constitutes the northern half of the Korean peninsula, borders China and Russia in the north and South Korea in the south. Prior to World War II, North Korea was a Japanese colony. In 1945, after the Japanese surrender at the end of World War II, Korea was divided into two zones along the 38th parallel, the north occupied by the Soviet Union and the south occupied by the United States. Shortly after, in 1950, began the Korean War, where North Korea decided to invade South Korea. In 1953, the Korean Armistice Agreement brought a ceasefire and established a demilitarized zone. However, no formal peace treaty. And despite North Korea's full formal name being the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, since then, Korea has been a brutal dictatorship, with living standards worse than anywhere else on the planet, citizens constantly starving to death, brainwashed by endless propaganda from the government, threatening to wipe countries off the map left and right with nuclear weapons, brutal labour camps, horrific human rights violations. The list is endless. This country is literally a prison. 99% of the population aren't allowed to move freely in and out of the country. They virtually have no access to the internet. Any source of entertainment consumed by the public is completely and utterly overseen by the government. There's of course a lot more to it, but to sum it up, that is North Korea. Now let's also set the scene in terms of football. North Korea of course has its own international football team. It also has its own domestic football leagues. Despite the country's troubled past and present, they've actually made it to the World Cup twice, once in 1966 and then again in 2010. They played their first ever international game on the 7th of October 1956 and they won 1-0 against China. Their biggest ever international win was on the 11th of March 2005, where they won 21-0 against Guam. Their biggest ever defeat actually came in the 2010 World Cup, where they lost 7-0 to Portugal. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, North Korea actually withdrew from all endeavours to qualify for any footballing competitions or even take part, only returning last year in 2023 in the qualifying rounds to the World Cup for the 2026 World Cup in the United States of America. Now, here's the thing. Because of how secretive a country North Korea is, it also of course translates into football. There isn't a massive amount of information known about anything. Now, like I mentioned before, the best recent success the North Korean national team have had was when they qualified for the 2010 World Cup. The North Koreans were very reluctant to broadcast the World Cup games to their own people, and that's because they were scared of getting humiliated as they drew into a group with Ivory Coast, Brazil and Portugal. However, the first game really didn't go too bad as they only lost 2-1 to Brazil. They decided to broadcast their next game against Portugal, where they proceeded to lose 7-0. As a misery compiler, they lost 3-0 to the Ivory Coast in the last game, picking up 0 points in the group stage. This of course saw them all return home to North Korea, and well, there are some rumours of what happened to that team. Some say they were publicly harassed, others say they were sent to labour camps. There were similar rumours with the 1966 World Cup too, which actually is a little bit silly considering they were massive underdogs and made it out of the group. They lost 3-0 to the USSR, they drew 1-1 with Chile and actually beat Italy 1-0, taking them to the quarter-final of the World Cup where they went into a 3-0 lead against Portugal, where Eusebio would promptly score 4 goals and Portugal would win 5-3. Now, there has been an interview since then with some of the North Korean players who actually played for North Korea in those games. And they actually did testify that when they returned to North Korea, they were given a hero's welcome for doing so well. However, you know, is that true? We'll never really know. And to be honest, if I was told by the North Korean government to tell a little white lie about how we were treated when we got back, you know, I wouldn't want my family to go into essentially a concentration camp, so it would probably be wise to agree with them and go along with it. But let's focus on the 2010 World Cup team for North Korea. What has happened to those players? Well, it's actually quite hard to say. If we take a look at the squad, we can see that there was actually 3 players that were playing outside of North Korea, which is of course unusual considering most North Korean citizens aren't really allowed to leave the country. Of course, they must have been granted some special sort of access considering they got to the World Cup. But we can see here An Young-hak, someone who we might have a little bit more information on considering he played outside of North Korea. He's now 45 years old, so retired from football. However, he spent his playing career playing in South Korea and Japan. We then have Hong Yong-jo. Now 41 years of age, he spent most of his playing career actually in Serbia and then in Russia. Before that, he spent some time playing at what is known to be North Korea's most successful domestic team, this team known as April 25 Sports Club. But of course, with North Korea being so secretive, we don't really have any more data, other than that he just played for them between 2004 and 2007. We don't know how many goals he scored, we don't know how many games he played. And then finally, Jong Tae-si. Now 40 years old, retiring in 2022, he spent most of his playing career in Japan, Germany, and also South Korea. So maybe the claims that these North Korean footballers, once being knocked out of the 2010 World Cup, being sent to labour camps, is not true, considering after they returned from the World Cup, all of them went on to have playing careers. Unfortunately, we don't really have much else to look at from this team because all of the other players actually played within North Korea, which means that we have little to no information on their playing careers. I guess you could argue that potentially the players that played outside of North Korea were actually let off the hook, not to erase suspicion, but those people who played within North Korea, well, they could do whatever they want to them. It is just speculation, and there isn't really any hard evidence to suggest that they were all sent to labour camps, but you can't really put it past North Korea. Anyway, moving on. You simply can't talk about North Korean football without mentioning the North Korean Wonderkid, Han Kwang-son. Maybe you've heard of him, maybe you've not. But believe it or not, this young North Korean footballing talent actually signed for Juventus in 2020. Albeit he was sold to the Middle East just a few days later due to UN sanctions. Anyway, let's take a look at this guy's career. In 2013, the North Koreans struck up a deal with the Spanish to send a group of North Korean aspiring footballers to train in Barcelona at a football academy. The pick of the bunch, you guessed it. Oh boy, Han Kwang-son. The time at the Spanish academy lasted for around about a year. North Korea would then send this group of players to the AFC Under-16 Championships in Thailand in 2014. North Korea would actually go on to win 2-1 in the final against South Korea. Han Kwang-son crucially scored in the final to clinch the victory, and also scored 4 goals throughout the tournament. After the success, the group of footballers would then advance over to Italy, where they would once again train in an academy. After years of training and soaking in the Italian culture, there were plenty of teams that were after him. When he turned 18, he was attracting the likes of Manchester City, Liverpool, and Juventus. Anyway, despite the interest, he would actually sign a professional contract with Cagliari in Italy. On the 9th of April 2017, he would go on to be the first ever North Korean to score in the Serie A, as he scored a late consolation against Torino in a 3-2 loss. The next season, he was loaned to Serie B to secure more consistent playtime. But his time in Italy was not without controversy and political unrest. The North Korean government actually made it forbidden for him to be portrayed in any other way than promoting his footballing skill, meaning he would not be able to be involved in any marketing campaigns, also sponsors and advertisements, under the threat of him being deported back to North Korea. Something else to note is one of the main reasons why he didn't get his big move to Man City, Liverpool or Juventus, especially for Liverpool, is because they couldn't guarantee that his wage wouldn't end up going back to North Korea and Kim Jong-un, which is just insane. However, later in September 2019, he finally got his move to Juventus. He signed a 2-year loan deal. His time at Juventus was pretty lackluster, playing in the reserves and not really contributing an awful lot. At the time, the Juventus manager Maurizio Sarri really liked Han Kwang-son and was even called up to the bench twice. Juventus saw so much potential that they actually bought him out of his loan deal, meaning that he became a Juventus player for €3.5 million. 6 days after he signed for Juventus, he was actually sold on. Juventus making 100% profit, selling him for €7 million to Qatari side Al Dahil. Very interesting. This was actually the result of some new UN sanctions, mandating that all North Koreans working overseas must be sent back to North Korea within 24 months. Trying to evade the UN sanctions, Han Kwang-son actually continued to flourish in Qatar, scoring 3 times and assisting once in 10 games, helping Al Dahil to win the Qatar Stars League. Anyway, he basically still couldn't evade the sanctions and his contract was terminated. From September 2020, he kind of went off the grid, and that kind of makes sense, considering he's North Korean and was sent back to North Korea, a country that is off the grid. With North Korean returning to international football, so was our man Han Kwang-son. In a recent 6-1 victory over Myanmar, Han Kwang-son actually scored and assisted once, showing his talents are still there. And in the time that he had seemed to have disappeared, He'd been playing domestic football in North Korea, playing for April 25 Sports Club. Considering Kim Jong-un persists with his love for nuclear warheads, having no regard for human rights, and recently confirming that there is no possibility for the reunification of Korea, it's very, very unlikely that we're ever going to see this unfortunate but very, very talented footballer soar to the heights that he potentially could have if he was born south of the border. I'm sure there's hundreds, if not thousands, of more North Koreans just like this guy, and you can't help but feel really, really sorry for them. In footballing terms, they can't really further their career, always being stuck playing in the North Korean domestic leagues, disregarding football, suffering some of the worst living conditions imaginable, under the constant threat of being sent to labour camps or execution if you don't show enough emotion when you're celebrating the Supreme Leader's birthday. It really is sad. Going back in time, public relations were not as bad with North Korea as they are today. North Korea's kit provider was actually British twice with Admiral and Umbro, Italian 3 times with Fila, Lotto and Legia, Danish with Hummel, and between 2003 and 2005, actually Adidas. That's crazy. However, it's got to be said that the current Chinese kit manufacturer is not really doing the business. Just to give you an idea of how controlling the North Korean government can be, of course, this is, well, what we have here is a news report. It's a news reporter reporting on the news that's going to be broadcast to a select few channels that the North Koreans have access to, which is obviously overseen by the North Korean government. Now, I'm not sure, I can't say if this is 100% authentic or not. The comments kind of point towards it. Anyway, what this actually is if we just play the video, is this is North Korea claiming that they actually won the 2010 World Cup. I mean, you just can't make it up. And of course they can do this and get away with it because the North Korean people don't know any better. They don't have access to the scores, the matches themselves. It's just absolute insanity. And this news report is painting them, and it is basically portraying them as winners of the World Cup, which is just absolute insanity. I'll leave a link to this video in the description. I don't speak Korean, so I don't know what this news report is actually saying in the video, and I don't know whether this is just a parody, but you can see they've even made up scores. These teams weren't even in their group. It's just mental. I assume this is the bit where they're saying that they toppled Cristiano Ronaldo, and of course they can somehow link it back to Kim Jong-un. It's insanity. But let me know. I'm not saying that is 100% real. It might not be real, but you've got to let me know, because if that is real, then it just sums it up, doesn't it? But that in a nutshell is North Korean football. And the reason why this video isn't much longer is because it's North Korea. Like we've mentioned, they're very secretive and don't release a lot of information at all regarding anything, let alone football. Now, if you enjoyed this video, maybe you should check out my previous video. We took a look at why the Bundesliga 2 is actually one of the most entertaining football leagues to watch right now in the world. Anyway, this video did take a while to make, so if you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.